Hey, this is Benjamin Boyce, located in my front room. Today's interview is with Jadis Argiope, who is a trans woman located in the southwest region of the United States of America. This is a very patient interview where we just talk about her experience and her counterposition against the binary is bullshit crowd. And we also get into what it is to become a feminine entity and how far that is possible for a male-bodied person to accomplish. So here's Jadis.
Yeah.
I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
A few days ago was Trans Visibility Day or something like that. And
Yeah.
Teen Vogue released a 6-minute film. Have you seen this?
Yeah, I did.
And it starts out pretty strong, and it says the binary is bullshit. And then there's one person in the film called Chase Strangio, and he I don't know the pronouns of this person, but they are a ACLU lawyer, and they got really upset that not a lot of people like this video. I guess the strong position that this person has is that there is no such thing as biological sex. It's only a political category. And I'm wondering, if you have any thoughts on that. I wanted to do an episode on that, but I didn't know where to start because it's...
Yeah, it's called gaslighting. It's absolutely gaslighting. So obviously there is biological sex. Obviously, I don't want to be that person that says nature designs anything, because evolution isn't designed, it's more happenstance, and things naturally flow in a particular direction. And once something works, it tends to stay that way. So let's just say you can, I guess, from one perspective, say we were designed to be bimodal. And so that's how it's been, and that's how it works. And it's a system that's worked for, billions of years? I'm not sure. I don't know how long sex chromosomes have existed, but quite some time. And to say that, biological sex doesn't exist is just, it's pseudoscience is what it is. So my position on that is that they are gaslighting. They are being very deceptive. And the thing is, if you're saying you acknowledge that that's a biological reality, and of course, if you're transgender, you're trying to fight that biological reality for one reason or another. Some people believe that maybe there's a chemical reason. Something changes so that your neurology doesn't match your biology. Some people believe that it's a spiritual thing, something metaphysical. Whatever your reasons, you have to at least admit that biologically speaking, you're either male or female, unless you're intersexed, which is a very, very rare condition. Or set of conditions, which most of us aren't. And I'm one of those people that believes that if you were able to definitively prove whether or not a trans person really is transgender because of these reasons, I don't think that most trans people would take these tests to prove it, because they don't want to be invalidated. Of course, they would also say that the tests are biased too.
To clarify, you're saying that if there was a specific scientific objective test to measure...
So let's, for example, let's say that you could document, let's say everybody routinely documented fMRIs, right? They could document their brain activity and track it throughout their lifetime. And then you can show changes over time. And then let's say you do that with everybody, hundreds of millions, billions of people, and you can look at patterns and be like, okay, well, cisgender people, by and large, follow this neurological pattern for this biological sex, for this gender. And then you look at the trans community, and you're like, well, yeah, you don't fit. You don't fit with what you're saying. I think that would be the case. You would show that, neurologically speaking, most trans women or most trans men don't match the biology that they or the gender that they say they fit in, or the biology that they want to fit into. So I think you might, you could never do it, but theoretically you could undertake such a thing, such an endeavor, and it would invalidate them, and so they would just refuse to participate in something like that. And it doesn't have to be just neurology. You could also do it in other ways too, potentially.
Why?
Do you know?
Why would they be invalidated by that, though?
The why is because. So I don't think that most transgender people really are transgender. If you talking to some of them, it's very clear that they're trying to emulate what they see and doing a very bad job of it. And I'm not excluding myself. I'm not immune to this. I'm not one of those that says, well, all these other trannies, forgive the word, they're invalid. But I'm genuine. I'm not going to want to be the one that says that because I don't know. And in truth, I don't care. I'm not trying to make excuses. I just am, and I'm going to continue to do what I do, and I don't give a crap. One thing I was going to say though is that potentially you could actually deduce someone's gender just by their activity, and I say that because a few years ago someone pointed out the fact that if you don't choose your gender on Twitter will try and figure it out for you, because there are patterns of behavior that males and females exhibit, and it can do a pretty good job of figuring out if you're male or female. And unfortunately, it had determined that I was male, and I had to change the gender marker from from the default male that it had predicted to female, and that made me very angry, and I felt invalidated by that. But then again, I kind of made excuses for it too, and the excuse that I think a lot of us get to make is that if you're trans male, you're socialized as male. And so that means that you pick up on things, little quirks, interests that are typical to males. Now, I have also feminine interests, but I don't have the majority of feminine interests that you obtain throughout a lifetime of living as a woman. So,
and you think socialization, the seat of gender is socialization?
Yes.
It's not an emergent property of an individual.
So there's both, but I think a lot of it is socialization. This is where I agree with the feminists on that. I think that, yes, a lot of it is absolutely socialization. There is something biological that makes someone, say, more empathetic, more sociable. But that's not all of it. That's not all the story. So you have this inclination towards certain behaviors, and that makes it better for you to actually execute them once you do learn them. But it's not set in stone necessarily, and environment certainly can change that.
Well, if gender is socialized, then what's to stop people saying that transgenderism is socialized? That you've just been socialized to want to be the other gender? Something in your social, something in the social environment.
The only thing stopping that are the transgender community and the LGBT community at large. They would stop that because they have a lot of powerful organizations, and they have basically armies of people that they can signal to run roughshod over anyone that goes against the party line. So
yeah, but these armies of people are basing their argument, like with this video that we just brought up at the beginning, on this whole social constructionist, everything is what I say it is. Like in the video, they said, my gender is my gender. A doctor can't tell me what my gender is. I am the gender that I feel that I am. And, you know, what happens when you have prostate cancer or breast cancer or cervical cancer? You know, you just got to tell the doctor, that's not cervical cancer. That's prostate cancer. That's not a vagina. That's inside a penis.
Did you ever see that? It might have been Teen Vogue. I'm not sure, but there was an article that talked about the body parts, and they didn't even want to call them vagina or penis. They want to have alternative words for this because it was too triggering for them. It's hilarious. The fact is, regardless of your gender identity, those are your parts. You have to live with that. That's a reality. And you can work around it. Certainly, you can get corrective surgeries, great. But those are the things you have to deal with and you have to come to terms with. And if you don't, if you stay in denial, that's only going to feed into your mental illness. And I think there is a mental illness component. Certainly, living a life deluded like that and insisting on others feeding into your delusions, that can't be healthy. It helps exacerbate cognitive distortions too.
Well,
By the way,
what about
okay,
when you said that the video was gaslighting people? If an individual is doing that to themselves, it's called mental illness. If an organization is doing that to the world and emitting this propaganda into the lives of teen girls, that's not a mental illness anymore, or that's mental illness writ large. That's gaslighting. But it's based on one concept that you've brought up several times now is invalidation. Like, what is underneath that being invalidated by people outside you, by society at large? Like, why is that so triggering, to use a tired phrase?
Well, I guess some people just lack the self-esteem or the ability to come to terms with the fact that people will disagree with their positions. They don't know how to handle conflict or a difference of opinion. They insist that all this is fact, and they have it validated by. Are you familiar with idea laundering?
Can you run me through that?
So I think it was Brett Weinstein talked about the concept of idea laundering, where basically, if you want to add credibility to an idea or lend false credibility to an idea, you'll filter it through the colleges and get them to do some kind of gender studies or whatever. And then later on, you can cite that study and say, see, it's validated. See, this is a fact now. Now you have to admit that this is true. And so a lot of the LGBT community refers to these really crappy studies that validate, it's confirmation bias, of course, but it validates their delusional beliefs.
What sets you apart from that? Or how have you decided to not be, to follow that path? It seems like a trickier path to go down where you've ended up.
Perhaps that's true. For me, so I don't know. Some people say that I might be on the spectrum. My parents thought I was. I had some counselors that thought I was. My thinking has been almost neurotic about wanting to always pursue truth and avoid delusions. And even if that hurts me. Also, I have a bit of a contrarian nature too. So I don't like lies. I don't like masks. I don't even like my makeup right now. I'm just wearing eyeliner. That's it. I don't want to overdo and sell something that's not there. It's not about, I don't want to lie to someone, basically. I don't want to paint a false picture, and I don't want to sell a false story, a false narrative. And if initially I believe something that's false, I will correct it later. But I just am compelled not to adhere to things that I know to be false. Yeah.
There's one, sorry. And this is selection bias, because I've been speaking to people who are interesting to me, specifically trans people who are interesting to me. So they end up somewhere within your ideological bent, truth-based, fact-based, contrarian, doesn't want to go along with the crowd, doesn't like big propaganda mechanisms and stuff. And there seems to be an apparent contradiction, or I can see some people having doubts that somebody who is transgender, who is natally male, and goes through a process to present female, it seems like a contradiction between wanting to change something that for some people is very immutable, and yet having this very scientifically oriented, fact-based mind, and like an aversion to what you say is a mask, and yet you've gone through a lot of steps to change your presentation, to defy the body that nature set you up with. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that? Or
just asking how I can reconcile that, or
Is there something to be reconciled, or are we? Is that narrative kind of looking at it the wrong way, or making a false equivalence between those two things?
So, I mean, I think I can see where you're coming from with that. What I'm doing, being transgender, is reconciling, where I think that there's, how do I say? All I know is that I don't feel right in my skin in the role of a male or presenting as a male. I feel more feminine for many different reasons. Not, it's kind of hard to justify it. I get it. I'm the kind of person that doesn't believe that biology is all that you are. So I'm more on the metaphysical level, perhaps, of thinking about my gender identity, perhaps. All I know is that it feels wrong to be male for me. For others, great. In fact, before I went towards an asexual lifestyle, I dated both males and females, and the kinds of males I preferred were very masculine. I think even kinesis has indicated that kind of inclination is towards more manly men. I'm pretty much the same way. I'm not sure why. But for me, I prefer to just be feminine and not even a gay male, but as female as possible. Just because it doesn't feel right to be male for me. I just feel out of place. I don't know. I'm sure it's rooted in some things. Actually, I've been dissecting some of my my history. Growing up, for example, I know that my mother and father were really, really strong on us not being sissies, and perhaps that backfired. I don't know, but whatever the case is.
What do you mean by sissy then?
So, for example, they were really, really touchy. They were so scared of us becoming sissies that if we did anything the least bit feminine, they would spank us for it. They gave my brother the most hell over it, and I observed how they treated that, and I thought, I don't want to be punished for that. So I just stayed gender neutral in ways that were neither masculine nor feminine. And for most of even my teenage years, I was androgynous, but not masculine. So in between, and I was comfortable living that way. I wanted to explore femininity, but I was terrified of it. And so I didn't really do anything until the Air Force.
What do you think was the root of your parents'
my
phobia?
So this was the root of that was my parents were. This is in the 80s, right? So in the 80s, everybody was terrified of HIV. Everybody was terrified of indoctrinating kids about gays and lesbians. This is the time where there was this huge phobia about it. The early days of gay pride in San Francisco and flaunting it. And my parents still remembered Harvey Milk, right? And so they were terrified that the world was going the wrong direction, and that they were going to challenge gender norms. In the 80s, of course, you also had a lot of men in bands.
Stallone. And then Whitesnake and
yeah. So you had more androgynous, big bands, huge singers that was that Boy George is one of those. So yeah, they wore makeup, they looked very feminine, and so my parents were scared shitless of how that was going to corrupt us. So they just kept us in a very sheltered environment. And we were sheltered because we weren't allowed in school at all. Theoretically, we were homeschooled, but we only got a couple of years of that. So we just got no education except for what was on TV for like 7.5 years. And then we went to high school. And that was only because of my grandmother.
And when you got out of the education structure, how did you end up continuing your education, or did you?
I didn't. So shortly after that, maybe about a year after that, I ended up getting involved with someone. And then I moved to Colorado. I was surrounded by the Air Force all around.
Oh yeah.
And because there were so many Air Force over there, I felt encouraged to enlist. And I thought, well, maybe I can go to school with a GI Bill. And then I did enlist. And then I only stayed there for 8 months because that's when, basically, right after basic training, that's when my gender dysphoria started to hit really, really
Really?
badly.
Did you have any memories of gender dysphoria when you were growing up?
Yeah, actually, yeah. But
And do
for
you
the
think
most
your
part,
parents were keen on that or observed that, and that's why they tightened
no.
things down? Or
Maybe I think for the most part it was I would I've always been weird to everybody. So in any setting, I'm a weirdo. So um, to my parents, though, they what they saw was just someone that was quirky. I don't know how to describe it. I just have a very strange personality. You can't tell from this interview, and you probably won't tell unless you're actually around me regularly. But I'm weird. Um, like for example, I like to squawk, or um, I'll just randomly start singing in a Muppet voice.
so
But
you're saying that your weirdness or your theatricality kind of provided a cover for your, I guess, your
yes,
gender and your
oh
sexuality,
yeah,
perhaps?
absolutely. They just wrote it off as just being weird or autistic or whatever. But no, yeah, there are definitely a lot of moments where my gender dysphoria got to me.
But
So, for
after the
example,
airport, after
the Air Force. So in the Air Force basic training, my focus was getting out of basic training, and so I graduated basic training on time. I went to my first tech school, which taught electronic principles, and it was there that I had time to sit and reflect. Um, and I saw myself in the mirror, and I didn't see myself because up to that point, I had been able to look into a mirror and see an androgynous being, something that I could live with androgyny. Um, and for a while, I thought that as a kid, actually, even as a kid, I had heard of transsexuality, and in my head, it was not possible to do the things that I wanted to do. I didn't know to what extent transgender people could do certain things. I didn't know about the corrective surgeries or the effects of hormones. I thought it was just all entirely cosmetic, and there wasn't just so much. There was only so much that you could achieve. I didn't. So I later learned that you could. There were better surgeries. Um, some of the cosmetic surgeries ended up, like for example, um, you can remove the brow bone and round
yeah.
out the. I didn't know that was possible. Um, I didn't know that hormones could actually cause breast development. I didn't know, and I was ignorant, very, very ignorant. And at any rate, the
But
more I learned,
after basic training, that sculpted you into more masculine than you were able
so
to
yeah,
tolerate.
so I put on muscle, I put on weights, and I was in the sun a lot, and it highlighted all the disgusting masculine features that I never wanted to see, um, and it grossed me out. It was nothing but revulsion.
Yeah.
So I freaked out about that, and so from then on out, um, I started doing research on what can I do to undo this. I learned more about what trans women were doing, and I started coming to terms with maybe I can actually do this. Maybe that there is a chance that I can reverse the masculinity. Um, and I knew I really, really wanted to be feminine. But there was a conflict I had, and that conflict was doing this while being in a relationship with a heterosexual woman. And I kept it a secret from her. I ended up marrying her while in my second tech school, not telling her anything.
Hmm.
And of course, when she saw the changes that basic training had done, she said, "I look so much better because I look so more manly," not realizing how much that hurt me.
Yeah.
Um, so things I did, I looked for like natural estrogens or any estrogen that I could get that was prescribed but not from a doctor. I didn't do anything to hide that either. There was a problem with that. So my wingman ended up ratting me out. But I also was suffering severe depression, so I wasn't thinking clearly for any of that.
How old were you?
I
In your
also,
late mid
uh,
20s?
so it was 20.
Okay.
So I started buying feminine clothes for my civilian clothing. So I was wearing women's pants and androgynous shirts, um, V-neck shirts, something that made me feel a little bit feminine, just a little bit. I started wearing eyeliner, and I got called out on that by my flight commander. Besides the clothes, besides the hormones, and I tried to excuse myself on that. I tried to let them think that I was just taking the hormones to control acne, to offset the androgens. Um, and they're like, just get a topical cream. But I let them. I used autism as an excuse. So to excuse all the behavior, because I had years where I had done that. I mean,
For
this is basically
to other people, but
survival.
not to yourself. Were you straight with yourself with where you were headed?
Of course, well, as straight as I could be, but then again, I was suffering depression, so there's not much clear thinking
Okay.
that you're doing. But
Yeah.
I absolutely exploited being quirky autistic to confuse people about my motives. And this is something I have done for a long time, just because if they found out my real reasons, they wouldn't let me do what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I don't like doing that, but it's a lot of it comes down to like a lie of omission, which I'm more okay with doing that than outright lying. But I'd still rather not, and I certainly have toned that down quite a bit. But so I was doing that, and I was also fasting. Like, actually, I went straight anorexic and bulimic because I wanted to lose all that mass.
Okay.
And it ended up snowballing. What ended up happening was my commander gave me orders to see a dietitian regularly. Had orders that someone watch me eat, and then they found out I was throwing up, and so I just kept getting write up after write up over this. And then when they wouldn't let me do all the things I wanted to do, I ended up trying to commit suicide, which was not the first time, actually. I had previously tried to do it because I was in high school. I had not come to terms with. I thought I was gay and I hated it, and I knew that my family would not appreciate it, so I tried to kill myself in high school. But at any rate, I conceded defeat to my commander, and she put me in a mental hospital. So I stayed there from the 31st through what was it? I want to say it's 10th or 11th of December. But the interesting thing was once I was in the hospital, though, I was free to be me. I could be as feminine as I wanted to, and I could have people address me by feminine pronouns, and I felt great. Except when I had to make calls to my then wife and tell her one excuse or another, and tell them it's a misunderstanding and that it's just stress got to me. I didn't want to explain to her what really happened, and I actually didn't explain to her even when I got back. She was disappointed, though, because up to that point she was proud of me, and I wasn't. I wasn't proud of myself for any of what the Air Force had made of me.
In the hospital, were you able to speak with a professional that was able to recognize
So
what was going on with you or get help?
yes, yes, uh, yes, and they even offered to help me find counselors in Colorado to help me with the dysphoria, with getting on hormones, and I I didn't do it because I wanted to keep it from my wife. And so when I was discharged, I did everything I could to keep it from her. Actually, what she thought, and I had at least conceded to her that before I was dating her, I was dating men. And so she thought I was just bisexual. And she could live with that as long as I could be with her. Great. I just, I was terrified to tell her that I wanted to be a woman. And so things started to snowball when she starts making plans about our future. Basically, look at it like this. I had a midlife crisis in my 20s. At age 21, going on 22, I had a midlife crisis because she's talking about we're going to settle down. We're going to get a loan and get a nice house. We're going to have kids and all these things. And I'm thinking, I don't want that. I don't want to be a father. I don't want to be I don't want to be solidified in a masculine role. And so I jumped. I didn't really have much of a plan. I just knew that I wanted to flee that life, that organized life, that was perfectly calculated life that would have been very comfortable to most any other person. I couldn't do it. I would rather live in chaos as a transgender woman than organized, perfectly comfortable life as a male. So it was a matter of months that we got divorced, and then so that was 2007, and then 2008 was when I really started taking serious steps. I started off. It was around the tail end of December of 2007 that I was doing part time. I got a wig and makeup, and so I tested the waters to see if people would be scared of me or what. I went to my local library. I just got on my computer, and just to see if people would reject me, and they didn't. And so as long as I kept to myself, I thought, well, that should be fine. And yeah, I was comfortable enough to do that. And so then I started taking real steps, like growing out my hair, getting laser hair removal, finding hormones from inhousepharmacy.com. Do you know what inhousepharmacy.com is?
No.
Okay. So a lot of trans women will get their, at least when they're starting out, before they go to a doctor, they'll get it from inhousepharmacy.com, that website shifts from one country to another, because they keep shutting it down because they're selling you hormones without a prescription.
And you did this without any professional guidance or assistance, or did you have any? Like a psychologist?
Initially, yeah.
Did you want anybody in authority or professional accreditation to
yes,
poke
I
your
did,
head?
but I didn't have the money to see such a person. And where I was in Colorado Springs, it's a very conservative place, and it has been for some time. Now, I don't know if it is now, but it was. And so the medical doctors didn't want to help me at all. No specialist wanted to see me. In fact, they insisted that this is something that they don't think needs to be solved with hormone therapy. This is something that needs to be fixed with just therapy. And they insisted that it's not. Basically, that they took the view that TERFs feel, or most anyone who's not transgender feels, that it's something that's on your head that you can fix through therapy. And if you just go to psychotherapy, you can figure it out, and maybe you can eventually be converted back to a heteronormative lifestyle or whatever.
One question. The pendulum is swinged in the opposite direction, where it's all affirmation for everything. Do you think that that's where you'd rather it be?
No. I don't think that we should be forcing people to think things that aren't true. Something that a hashtag that I use regularly online is hashtag there are four lights, because it reminds me so much of the episode of Star Trek The Next Generation where Picard is being interrogated.
Yeah.
And he just has to say that there are five lights. And then he can have his freedom. Then he can have food. And his life would be so much more comfortable if he just says there are five lights. And of course, at the end, he actually starts to see five lights. They do break him, but that's right at that time is when they recover him. And
so
it's all about controlling.
You did your own gatekeeping in a way. I guess reality was society was gatekeeping. You financially, you didn't have the resources to connect with a doctor who would be affirmative for you. And then all around you, you're surrounded by conservative, probably pretty the opposite of affirmative. So you had to struggle your way. And there's blog posts that you've written that get into just how far you went to reach where you are right now, or where you wanted to head. And so I think you would probably say that you would have liked it to be not as difficult for other people in your situation.
So my thinking has always been, I wish there was something like Planned Parenthood for transgender, that you could just go in and get what you need done. So just go in, no questions asked. You get the hormones. If you're female to male, you get testosterone. If you're male to female, you get estrogen. Nobody asks any questions. And if you want to have certain surgeries, again, no questions. I would have loved that. I think your body, your choice. But at the same time, when you're a kid, you don't know your ass from a hole in the ground. You really don't. And you need to be shaped. You need to be guided. That much is true. There is some agency, but it's very limited. There's a lot of distortions. Kids just don't know what they're looking at. They don't have the tools to articulate or understand anything, really. So that's why they need to go to school. That's why they need to be taught everything. Once you're at a certain level, though, then you should be free to make your own decisions, right? And so as an adult, your body, your choice. Really, try to keep it as informed as possible, but again, it's your body, your choice. No one has a right to tell you what to do. If you want to amputate your limbs or whatever, you're insane, but you should be free to fuck up your own life. And there are people that will amputate their limbs because of body dysmorphia. They insist that they need to be crippled. Fine. If you want to do that, great. But
what about the negotiation with, let's say, bathrooms or sports? Like when you enter into negotiations with other people, like that's one part where I see the conversation breaks down between libertarianism, the pure libertarian trends.
So if you allow female to males to compete with other men, they're going to be encouraged to engage in risky behaviors that will hurt themselves. Never mind the fact that they're probably going to be a little bit more fragile than genetic males because they don't have the bone density, the strength that genetic males do. They don't generally have the same kind of mass that genetic males do. So they're more likely to get hurt. Or otherwise they'll hurt themselves trying to push themselves to be able to compete with other males. And then you have male to females, and not all of us, but many of us, probably most of us, have advantages that genetic females don't have. So how I look at testosterone's effect on the brain, or even hormones on the brain, it's like stretch marks, right? It scars you, but it permanently scars the brain or shapes the brain. It creates pathways. Maybe look at it like a river, right? Carving a path for a river. And so the water's going to flow through there. Even if it dries up, when the rains come back, it comes right through there, right? Well, genetic males, even when they transition and they try to get on hormone therapy, they're still going to have flow through those masculine tributaries, right?
Yeah, not just their bone structure and their muscle mass and various aspects of their
neurology.
Body, but their neurology as well. Yeah.
Yes. So they're still going to engage in masculine patterns, and they will be in denial about it, and they'll talk about how, no, this is feminism. I think, yes, it comes down to the fact that they do still have those masculine patterns, those masculine drives. and they don't want to admit that. And they do have those advantages that genetic females just don't have. That's not all of them, and it's kind of hard to test whether or not they actually do have that advantage.
How far does your transition go? I mean, if we're talking about psychology, if testosterone has shaped your psychology, and somebody wants to transition from male to female, they start with the body, right? They start with the hair, the cosmetics, and then they go deeper, all these different levels. But I mean, even shaping your speech patterns and consciously exerting effort beyond the body. How far does it go? When Twitter or some algorithm recognizes you as male or male typical in your speech patterns and your interests, how far do you want to translate yourself into the typical female? Is it far enough to go, I am no longer experiencing gross dysphoria when I look at myself in the mirror, when other people look at me?
So most trans people, I think it's all superficial. For me, I can't say that's true, but I think for most it is all superficial. For me, I do recognize when I engage in patterns that are not feminine, and it irks me, and I try to be mindful of that. But also, sometimes I dismiss it myself just because I realize that I actually am quirky even for a male, so maybe it's okay. But I am mindful of when I'm doing things that I think stand out as masculine, and I'll try to stop it.
I see that it could become an overwhelming burden for somebody to not be able to accept themselves how they were sculpted in the womb and by puberty.
It can be, and if they're able to reflect on all the gravity of what kind of overhaul you're talking about. Yeah, I don't think that most people transitioning go that far, though. I think that a lot of it is really skin deep. As long as they can blend in and be treated as feminine, that's all they care about. Thing is, though, people do pick up on whether or not you're transgender, even if you do pass, because it's kind of like the uncanny valley thing. It's did you ever see the Rogue One? I think it was Rogue One with Tarkin.
Yeah.
Now, some of the stills didn't look so bad. When he started moving, it was just so bad that you could tell it was really bad CGI. But some of the stills was like, oh, that seems okay. Well, that is the case with a lot of trans women, where if you just have a picture, right, and they might be from all directions perfect. Is how they move, how they talk. All these little things play into everybody else's model from what they've seen of other women. And something's off. People know something's off. They may not know what it is, but they know something's off. In my case, that's absolutely the case. But then again, like I said, I'm very quirky, so even for a male, people just know something's off.
And how do you navigate that? It seems like the big companies with all this money behind them want to force society to not see those differences, which goes back into the gaslighting. But nominally, that's okay because they're trying to relieve suffering. But at what point aren't there trade-offs here?
So, are they trying to relieve suffering? That's the question.
Okay, there's the question. I mean, I want to give them the most slack.
The reality is, I don't think they give two craps about what they're actually sending out, what they're creating, the culture that they are creating, or at least on the fine detail. I think there's a greater picture, and I think there might be even a greater agenda to it. There's a part of me that thinks that this is part of some capitalist scheme.
For the medical industry?
Medical industry, the cosmetic. So you're getting men to buy women's products. You've doubled your market.
Yeah, well, that's a good point.
So
strong enough for a man and made for a man who wants to be a woman too. I'm trying to throw out some taglines for Laurier or whatever.
And so the thing is, it is really good for business, but it's those involved. If you're transitioning, you're going to go broke. most of us go broke. It's, what was it? I think I saw a video of
ContraPoints.
Yeah, ContraPoints. She was talking about how she's a middle class transgender woman, which basically makes her the 1%. And that really is true, because most trans women are not middle class. Most are definitely not like Caitlyn Jenner. They're barely getting by because they go broke. They spend all their money on surgeries and therapy and everything they can to pass. And of course, in the end, many of them end up killing themselves, partly because they realize that there's something still off. The mortality rate for transgender, I think, is high, not because they're like, what have I done? And they're regretting the surgeries. It's so much as the same problem with the people that commit suicide after getting lap band surgery. There used to be a very high mortality rate, and I haven't checked up on it recently, but people who would get lap band surgery, they would kill themselves because they would lap band surgery. Basically, you make it so that you can't eat as much food.
Okay.
You can't. Yeah. So what that meant is that people were losing weight because they just couldn't eat as much. And some people that get this, they'll also get liposuction and all that. So they lose a lot of weight. But then they realize that that's not everything. They haven't solved their real problems, because the root behind their depression is deeper than just their weight. The weight was a symptom. So for those who are gender dysphoric, it's not just the cosmetic. There's something much deeper that they haven't addressed. And if they set their goal of, this is everything, once I do this, I'm complete, they're going to be very disappointed. And many of them end up killing themselves, because it's like, well, what have I done now? I've blown all my life savings. I've taken out all these loans on this surgery, and what have I got to show for it? I've lost my job. I've lost my family, my kids, because the fact is, if you're a trans woman, chances are, at least there was up until recent years, chances are you were probably in your 30s, 40s, 50s, you had a family, and you alienate yourself from them. And many trans women lose custody of their kids. They don't get to be around their kids, or at least they did for a while. I don't know if that's changed, but they weren't allowed to be around their kids. So I've talked to a lot of trans organizers who have lamented over that, the fact that they weren't allowed to see their sons and daughters because the judges insisted that they were perverts or whatever, just for being trans. So
how did you yourself parse your depression from your dysphoria and not fall into the trap that you're describing of chasing an external solution to an internal cause?
Well, the depression never really leaves, so I still have these depressive tendencies, but it's something that I've learned to sort of sequester some of those thoughts. Don't feed them. It's, if you're familiar with the metaphor of the two wolves that are always fighting, and they're like, there's a good one and there's a bad one. Which one wins is the one you feed. Well, depression is one of those wolves. Don't feed it. Every now and then you do feed it, but try not to. Do
you ever want to give it lap band surgery, maybe? Would that be the right thing to do to that bad wolf? That was a joke. Sorry.
Yeah. So the thing is, for me, I'm never going to give it depression because I've actually anthropomorphized depression. And so I have a sentimental attachment to it, as strange as that sounds.
Kind of like a guardian angel or a saint?
More like a lover. And so I used to be in love with suicide and was longing to be in the arms of anthropomorphized suicide. So it's still there, waiting for me. If and when I'm ready, but I'm not going to do it because I have reasons to live, legitimate reasons to live. Part of it is I'm angry at how screwed up the world's turned out to be. Even where I'm getting my way, things that I've always wanted. Like, I've always wanted trans women to be accepted. That's great. Awesome. This is progress. But now we've gone too far. So you have like a balance point. And before we were over here, we were off. And people talk about good and evil, right? As if they're opposites. But it's more like good isn't like there's good, there's evil. It's more like good is the center.
Yeah.
Evil is approaching the extremes. So as long as you're walking towards that center, that is good. Once you walk past that, once you're past and you're going against that direction, then that's evil. So approaching balance is good. And we're way off balance. Of course, we're also a very polarized country and a very polarized world thanks to the internet, because the internet has it's done a good job of uniting people and dividing people at the same time.
Yeah.
And especially those that speak the same tongue, because now other cultures that had nothing to do with us are getting involved in the conversation, and they're being affected by our dialogue.
Yeah. We are united in our division.
Yeah. So it's a dangerous situation. I have my suspicions about how the internet has essentially been weaponized against culture. And I think the LGBT agenda has been. I think the LGBT community is a pawn in a greater war, and I'm terrified of what this means. Part of it, I think, it's tied to globalism, and I think it's also tied to capitalism. And so, obviously, I mentioned, how it's good for business, but there's so much more that goes into it. I think it also ties into the population crisis / global warming debates. Well, so one thing I've always believed is being LGBT is a result. Nature creates this through one mechanism or another as a result of a high population density. So the population is too dense. If it's too dense, it's at a risk of
overpopulation.
Disease propagates. Well, besides the overpopulation and running out of resources, it is very susceptible in a high population density for disease to propagate. So you need to reduce that population. I think there are mechanisms in there, either sociological or biological, that nature kicks in one form or another, so that the population decreases. And so that's where I believe that being LGBT is useful. And so I think there is a good naturalist argument of being LGBT. But it's definitely been compounded, and confusion has been compounded by the internet.
But on a personal level, I mean, you're bringing up a big problem, like these big pants problems. But if you were to become a resource to other people who are walking a similar path that you've found yourself in and that you found yourself walking, like what are the things that you're able to give now in the form of wisdom or advice or something like that, to help people parse out and avoid the fail state of suicide or going in either overcorrective direction? Do you feel that you're prepared to share that with other people?
So in other words, if I were mentoring another trans person,
or somebody who thought that they might be.
I'm not sure if I'm hinged enough to guide anybody. But I don't think I make a good parent, to be honest. I mean, I'd love to be a parent, but I'm not sure that I am as. I'm actually quite certain I'm not balanced. But I want to be. But I'm sure I'm not balanced, and I know that I'm gonna throw people off. But I would always challenge people to reflect and consider. In fact, I actually have talked people out of transition before. I've talked cross-dressers out of transition who were confused, and it's because their reasoning for it wasn't sound. So they're trans women, well, cross-dressers that insist that they were trans women, had confided into me what they thought made them trans, and the way I broke it down to them, I explained to them that, one, these are misogynist stereotypes, and these traits are not. Some of these traits that they're talking about are not innately feminine. And basically, I told them, if you want to be feminine, just be feminine, but you don't have to change your gender to do that. There are plenty of effeminate males, and you don't even have to be gay. I think some people, maybe they might even come out as gay when they're not even gay. It's just because, well, that's the only identity group that is free to do that outside of being trans, but they don't want to transition, so I'm just gay. But I've actually encountered those who call themselves gay that are closer to asexual. So, yeah, I think that there's this insistence that you have to adhere to a group label. I don't think that you need to. Just be yourself. You don't need to fit into some mold and have some sticky label attached to you that defines or prescribes behaviors. It doesn't make sense to me. Just do you. And if you feel like being feminine, be feminine. But you don't have to do what I think is a lot of people do, is overcompensate. And they go too far. Like, actually, even myself, I can speak for myself. Initially, when I transitioned, I did overcompensate, and I actually did start using a bunch of caked-on makeup. And actually, at work, when I initially transitioned, I transitioned on the job, and I lost customers because I was working in the food industry, and my regulars stopped coming because they saw a male pretending to be female in front of families, in front of kids. And they said, we're never coming here again because we don't want our kids around that. And that was kind of off-putting, but fortunately my employer was very kind to defend my position on this. But I did tone it down because I realized that, one, it's not good for my pores. Caked on makeup is not good for your pores. And two, that's not really what I wanted. My goal was to pass as female and
not to be a caricature of the feminine.
Right, exactly. And, well, to be honest, people teaching me how to put on makeup initially were caricatures of women. They were drag queens. I learned how to be feminine. My mentors were drag queens. That is a horrible mentor for a trans woman. But when you're first starting out, you take what you can get, and that's what I did. So I looked bad.
Do you think that your transition runs in parallel to a concept of self-development, or Jung's idea of individuation? Does sculpting yourself into the feminine, does that run in parallel, or does it aid your development of yourself, like in some sort of metaphysical movement towards an authentic state of being? Does that aid, or does it form a block for you, or is it a distraction, or do you think it's a support in that?
So, well, that's a good question. My manifestation of femininity is, unfortunately, pretty much as androgynous as it was pre-transition. So even living as a male, the difference is that label and the physical appearance. So I want to be free to be feminine, but not compelled to behave in feminine ways. So I've been experimenting with, well, like I said, I was not socialized to be female, so there are behaviors I never picked up. I don't want to do something because you're supposed to do it, right? So my behaviors and my exploration, if it comes out naturally, great. But one of my concerns is that I'm going to end up doing a behavior just because, well, that's what women do. And so whatever manifests from my transition, as long as it's organic, that's what's important to me. It can't be forced, and it can't be fake.
And what do you want from society then?
What I want from society is just the freedom just to be me. Now, so I want to be able to go into the restroom without anyone saying anything, but at the same time, and I do, so I will use the ladies' room, right? But I get terrified that someone's going to read me. Every time I go in there, whenever I go in the restroom, I'm the last person out because I'm scared that someone's going to see me and say that I'm an imposter and I don't belong in there. So I'm the last one out. But I want to be free to just use the facilities and not be judged. But I understand that argument that this is their space, right? That this is cisgender women's space. Okay, that's fine. I don't want to use the men's space. I kind of feel like from my surgery, I earned my right not to have to use the men's room. If there were gender neutral restrooms, great. But I feel I should not have to be lumped into the male category just because of the steps that I've taken.
We should. I want to loop back around to where we started. In the light of your interaction with the binary, just on the level of the restroom, it sounds like a pretty stressful situation for you. At the same time, you don't necessarily think that we need to smash the binary or say that it's bullshit. You think that there's a negotiation that can happen that needs to happen between trans people and then I guess the group that they're asking for acceptance from, or at least within the...
Right. Well, I think even most trans people recognize the binary. They have to. So the fact that you're transitioning means you recognize the binary, unless you're genderqueer. But for the most part, if you're transgender, you say there is a binary. However, I don't match this portion of the binary. I match this other portion. I think a lot of it comes down to a misunderstanding of gender identity and gender expression. I think many people who transition they don't recognize that you should just be free to express your gender as you see fit, and the world doesn't need to judge you. But they transition anyway, partly because they're encouraged and motivated by their peers, especially if they're kids. Their peers will tell them that this is what you do because if you have these feelings, then you must be transgender. But the reality is they just are not typical, or at least not in mainstream typical in their gender expression. And that's fine. They should be free to behave in ways that aren't typical. If you've got a girl that's a tomboy, great. Or she's aggressive, she wants to be in sports and all that. Doesn't mean that she's an FTM. That just means that she's not exhibiting typical behavior that you see. It's not even that it's abnormal. It's just that maybe it's not common where you are. It's all relative. I wouldn't want to smash that binary. I think that we need to preserve that binary. But at the same time, I'm not going to be the person that says, I'm transgender and you need to call me a biological woman. There's no such thing as transgender. All women are women. And it's so subjective. It's so stupid. No, I agree with Kinesis. Kinesis and transrational. She talked about we need to be prefix women. We are trans women. This is true because the fact is trans women aren't biological women. There are things that are going on in our lived experience, to use that modern parlance, that are not congruent with cisgender women's experience overall. Like, trans women don't have to go through periods. They don't have to worry about getting knocked up. They might incur the same kind of misogyny, and of course, it might also perpetuate that same misogyny. But yeah, I think a lot of trans women do perpetuate misogyny. I don't think they realize that they're doing it. I don't think that's true with the female to males, though. I really don't. I think you're more likely to see that. I don't think you're going to see misandrony from female to males, but I do definitely see it in male to females.
Because back to that concept of being invalidated or not being validated, it seems like there's a psychological blowback from not being accepted, where they go out of their way to be the most repellent thing possible to force acceptance on everybody. It seems like people, maybe I shouldn't mention McKinnon, but she's blocked me, so I'm going to go ahead and mention McKinnon.
She blocked me too. Yeah, she blocked me too. It's great.
Because you're probably one of those transgender transphobes that everybody hates so much. Worst of both worlds.
Yep.
But the way that she plays the game, and the way that a lot of other like Twitterati trans people play the game, it's and then with that video that we began with, it's, you don't need to go that far. You don't need to say that the binary is bullshit. You don't need to gaslight everybody. You don't need to encourage 13-year-olds to get on the medication that they want right then, which is somebody that Strangio person is advocating for now, which is just absolutely ridiculous. You don't need to go that far. I think some of that is fueled by a sense of insecurity or a sense of unresolved issues on the inside of the individuals participating in it. And then we could probably go in, I don't have any research and I'm not really good at this part of the thing, but we could probably say there's probably a lot of big money and do the whole Lester Freeman from The Wire thing and map it all out. Like which companies like really are pushing this, which big hunches are pushing this.
I would like to see that.
Well, we probably do a little. Well, we wouldn't get HBO funding on it because HBO is on the other side of this issue. But I'm just saying that there's a negotiation between the madness that is being shoved down everybody's throat and the individual people who have it pretty hard, that suffer some pretty severe forms of gender dysphoria, and then they decide to transition with the full knowledge that society is always going to have a problem with them, even if the society can be moved and inched towards more acceptance. Every time that you're going to go into a female restroom, you're going to have to be careful and be on your guard to not trigger other people, right? So it seems like there's a way to prepare people to become trans as much as there's a way to help society be more accepting of the trans individual. Well, and the way that the big trans advocates are going about it is the exact opposite way.
Oh, yeah. No, yeah. They're all in your face about it. They feel the need to be authoritarian, and that's what really rubs me the wrong way. Being more of a libertarian mindset, no, I'm sorry, but you don't get to do that. You don't get to gaslight people and tell them, nope, you have to think this way. You can't even, it's not even that you can't behave a certain way, you can't say certain things, you're not allowed to think differently. This is very, very dangerous. They're trying to hijack people's brains. And the first brains that they hijacked were the LGBT. They've indoctrinated their own. They've got them to absorb this rhetoric and got them to execute their dangerous principles. They've turned them all into activists. And the thing is, you don't have to be an activist. But they insist that if you don't, it's an existential threat. They're going to try and wipe us out. And so it's this. I feel like we're being played. Honest to God, we are being played.
Well, how do you not be played?
No, I think, how do I not be played? By challenging myself and by surrounding myself with people that don't buy into that kind of rhetoric. What I would like to see for the trans community is basically kind of like what they have in India, where they have a class of eunuchs that live as females. I forgot what they're called. But they aren't, I mean, many do shun them. Many do look at them with disgust. But there is a great portion of them that just looks at them as a different class of people. And they're essentially, they're treated in depending on that group, they're treated as women, but not women. So they're just left to be, right? I would like that. Just leave us be. Now, the conflict that a lot of trans women have and trans men have is, well, how do we get the heterosexual community to validate us? Because we want to date the heterosexual community. We want to be part of that. We don't want to live separately, have like two different worlds. Well, I don't know if that's right, because the fact is we're an anomaly. We are an aberration of nature. That's okay. Nature creates aberrations all the time. But we are an aberration of nature. We are against the norm. There is a norm, and that this is the thing that they're trying to say, is that there is no such thing as normal. That's not true. There is a norm. There is an average. We don't fit that model, but that's okay. Let us do our thing. Let them do their thing. And if we can get included in their activities, if we can convince some of them to date us or engage with us, great. But we shouldn't force them to do that. That isn't organic. That isn't natural. And that causes more problems than it solves.
Yeah. Normophobia is not the solution to transphobia.
Exactly.
Normophobia? So, yeah, I don't know.
I'm sure there's another word for it, but yeah. It's a fear of normalcy, right? Or normality, yeah. And the fact that they don't even want to say there is such a thing. Oh, there's a little spider.
It's spider season. I got some on my porch now, all of a sudden.
Yeah, this is on my porch. I'm on my balcony. It's cute. I like spiders. Incidentally, I don't know if you noticed, but my last name is from a spider. I took it from a spider.
Argiope?
Argiope. It's Argiope. I took it from specifically Argiope aurantia, which is a spider all over North America. And the first time I encountered it, I thought it was the most intimidating spider I'd ever seen, but it was also very beautiful, and it kept to itself. You think it's going to be one of those menacing spiders because of how big it is and how bold, how its web is just in your way, but it just keeps to itself. Just stay out of its space, let it do its thing. It's not going to bother you. And I thought that was a metaphor for me. Yeah.